Hi, my name is Joe. Today we're in Rotterdam and we're going to take a look at some architecture and try to shoot some long exposure architecture photographs. In the first video we're talking about long exposure photography in general and also did some examples with seascapes. Today we are going to try long exposure architectural work, which is quite a bit different from let's say the general seascape, because of the fact that the only objects moving are in the sky. So what you usually have to do when you want to take full advantage of long exposure architecture work is to point your camera straight up to the sky. So today we are in Rotterdam. We have found a few buildings on a business site here. That is one of the buildings that I want to photograph. It has some very nice shapes. The weather isn't cooperating very much today, so we have a completely overcast sky. We're hoping that it's going to be more sunny later today, because one of the major aspects of architecture photography, of course, is that you need to have some good clouds, because you're pointing your camera straight up to the sky. And my ideal setting, my ideal conditions would be that you would have, let's say, 65% of blue sky and 30% of clouds, or 35% of clouds, and preferably fast-moving clouds. When I have that type of conditions, then I would usually take, let's say, a long exposure photograph of, let's say, 5 minutes or longer than that. Well, you've already seen some of my architectural photographs, so well, why not go take a closer look at the buildings and see what we can do with those buildings. So I think I found a very nice vantage point to take a good photograph of this building, and it's this part of the building. So I'm going to move the camera up. So this is what I see right now, but I want to get a little bit closer even, so to make it more dramatic. And if I would take a shot, then it would be something like this. So this is what I'm trying to take. What I'm going to do is attach my remote control to the camera, and that's the only thing I'm going to do right now, because I'm going to compose the shot first. So I have to crawl underneath the camera. So that's the physically demanding part, especially when you do this all day. I can assure you can get some very tired legs. So. So I've set up the composition. The only thing I have to do right now is to make sure that all the lines are leveled horizontally, vertically, etc. So I'm going to take a look at that one first, because my camera should be perpendicular to that side of the building and also to that side of the building. You have to be very accurate. So this is completely different from seascapes, in which you can just point your camera forward, straight forward, and just take a shot as long as your horizon line is leveled. But here you have to take care that all lines are leveled. So I'm now going to look through the viewfinder to see if the composition is still there. So what I'm going to do right now is going to take first a normal shot and then take a long exposure photograph, but the long exposure time is not going to be very long. So I'm going to take a long exposure photograph of, let's say, 30 seconds. Because there's no use of taking a very long exposure photograph with the sky like that. But usually when I have some blue sky and some clouds, then I would take an exposure of, let's say, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, or even longer. So I'm going to take a regular shot first. Set on autofocus, AV setting, and I think I would need something like 7.1 aperture, and it says 250 of a second, so I'm going to take a shot. Well, it's looking pretty good. It's a quite straightforward architectural shot. It's also quite an abstract shot. because you're looking straight upward to the sky, and with the correct crop, in this case a square crop, it's going to be very abstract looking. So why am I talking a lot about the sky? Well, so if you would take a look at one of the pictures I'm going to show you right now, then you can see what the effect is of a long exposure sky on an architectural subject. With all the streaks of clouds, it creates a sort of mysterious, almost unearthly atmosphere. So that's a very important aspect of my type of photography. The fact that I'm a fine art photographer wants me to make me move away from reality as many times as possible. And that can be done with creating all those fantastic looking streaks of clouds in the sky. I try to, let's say, capture some movement in the sky. You can't see that now with the naked eye, but it's possible that there's some movement in the end result after all. I set this for aperture 7.1. I'm going to look up the correct exposure time, which is 1/250th of a second on my app. Or you could use a chart or a table that you can download from the internet. But I'm going to do it like this, 1/250th of a second, and I'm trying to use 10 stops. And it says I'm going to need 4 seconds, which is a little bit too slow. So maybe what if I do use, let's say, 16 stops. So I'm going to stack my 10 stops filter with the 6 stops filter. In that case, it would take me 4.5 minutes. And with the added correction of, let's say, 50%, because I'm shooting with more than 8 stops, it would be somewhere around 6-7 minutes. That's way too long. So I'm going to go for the 10 stops only, so I'm not going to stack my filters. I'm going to go for the 4-second exposure with a correction of 50%. It's going to take, let's say, 10 seconds. So I'm going to take a 10-second exposure with my 10-stop filter. You also might be wondering why I'm using the aperture of 7.1. It's not sort of a given setting, but it's my ideal setting, because 7.1 is, let's say, almost the sweet spot of the lens. It ensures that your picture is going to be very sharp without any diffraction. And at the same time, when you take a long exposure shot, with, let's say, what most photographers do with, let's say, f/22 with a very small aperture, you would also see all the dust marks on your sensor. So that's something I wouldn't recommend at all. So I prefer to shoot with f7.1 or f8.0 or even wider. In that case, you won't see any dust marks at all. So that's also a very positive thing about shooting with a more wider aperture. All right, 10 stops. Also, don't forget to put it to manual focus instead of autofocus. So I'm going to switch over to bulb setting, and I have an aperture of 7.1. You know what? I'm going to add one f-stop and put it on 8.0. So I'm going to use an aperture of 8.0, so I can use an exposure time of, let's say, I've calculated one with 7.1 or 4 seconds. So I guess this is going to be 8 seconds. So I'm going for an exposure time of 15-16 seconds. So there it goes. "16 seconds, okay. Let me check. It's not too bad. I'm looking at the histogram right now, and you see it's missing a little bit of the zones, let's say in 8, 9, and 10. So I'm going to add a little bit of that by taking something of a longer exposure, something like 20 seconds. So always check your histogram, it's quite important. Yeah, it's looking much better. You know what? I'm going to take another one of 25 seconds, just to make sure I have a good exposure. All right. When you look at the histogram, you see that it now completely covers the whole range. Maybe a little bit too much. So when I go look at the previous photograph I took, it's one of 22 seconds. I think that one looks a little bit better. You see, there's no effect on the sky visually, but maybe when I import this in Photoshop, I can increase some contrast and I can get some nice effects. Anyway, so that's something that I'm going to demonstrate in the post-processing session. Well, the more I look at the picture right now, I have to admit that I'm quite fond of the picture. I mean, the thing I like about this picture is the quiet sky, the sky that's acting like negative space that adds to my composition. Also, when you look at the picture, you could see that my let's say the point where both of the sides of the buildings are intersecting is almost exactly in the middle of the photograph. Well, let me round this up with a summary of some let's say some tips when you shoot architecture photography and using long exposure techniques with that. First, make sure that your camera is leveled on all sides. That's a very important thing. Another important aspect is, okay, take a look at the weather conditions. If it's totally overcast, it shouldn't be a problem at all. In that case, just go for the relatively short exposures something between 15 seconds and a max of 30 seconds. There's no need to go with an extreme long exposure when you have an overcast sky like this. Well, if you don't have any overcast sky, but the ideal sky setting, well, at least in my case, with let's say 60% of blue sky, 40% of moving clouds, then you can go with the very long exposures, something like 5 minutes or longer. So you get all the ethereal looking and smooth looking streaks of clouds. Make sure that when you buy a ball head, that's one that you can adjust very accurately. There are all sorts of ball heads that you can purchase, but usually it is okay. The more expensive a ball head is, the better it is, the more accurate it is. So that's what I would recommend, not to go for the very cheap ball heads. Also, another thing is that you might consider is buy yourself an external field monitor, one that you can attach on top of your camera, so you don't have to crawl underneath the camera all the time, but just take a look at your monitor, and so it's more easy to compose your shot that way with using an external monitor. And usually they are not very expensive. They come quite cheap for, let's say, 200 to 300 euros. Then you already have a good external field monitor. I'm going to take a look around the building again to see if there are more ideal vantage points and more composition options for me. So I'm just going to take a look at it, and I'll see you the next time in the next video with the post-processing session.